Welcome to Healing Wisdom, a Thursday morning talk show featuring guests sharing their stories and knowledge. We discuss the healing aspects of the arts, metaphysics, social justice, and adventure through all types of terrain. So join me, Pandora Peoples, here on WOMR 92.1 FM in Provincetown and WFMR 91.3 FM in Orleans. We're streaming worldwide at WOMR.org. Hello, hello, hello out there. This is part 2 of my conversation with expert movement sound instructor and educator, Dr. Rebecca Burrill. She's got an upcoming retreat in Scotland at Findhorn, June 10th through the 17th. Tell us about that first language, that relationship between movement and sound in utero.
Every gesture of sound evoked a movement, and every gesture of movement evoked a sound. So there's this immediacy of the identity of meaning. What's the quality of this experience I'm having? This is the first languaging. And so then I came to understand that this was really the language of art. So art is our first language. It's an aesthetically organized language. Our perceptions are aesthetically organized. So, and I took that further to recognize that, well, that's how indigenous people were in nature. That's how plant spirit medicine, that tradition in plant spirit medicine, came into being for indigenous peoples, being present with the qualities of the creatures and intelligence of plants. It's not like, the Europeans came around and started, interviewing, well, how did you know this plant had these properties? And they couldn't take in that they were being communicated with by plants. This was an reciprocal relational communication. And so they would come up with things like, well, it was trial and error. You just pick up a plant, decide, well, this plant must be good for knitting bones if you make a compress with it. And so you tried it on, did it work, didn't work, which is, ridiculous. We'd all still be sitting around wondering what all these plants are doing when there's plant spirit medicine is a hugely vast science, an intuitive and art science that's been around, since indigenous times. And it's been a threat to certain very patriarchal ideas about what we want reality to be. And so in the 16th and 17th centuries, we started killing off all the plant spirit medicine people in Europe and the midwives. These are all herbalists and midwives. So this whole capacity to know the world through this aesthetic languaging has been bad-mouthed and very much injured as a valid way of knowing and being in the world. And so that's what the work I'm doing is. It brings it all back as not just valid, but it brings it back as absolutely essential. And it's absolutely the primary language. And it's really, in our modern art, we have a lot of conceptual art, which has its place. I'm working with pure perception and aesthetic communication in art making. So you get down to the real nitty-gritty, the really foundation, the primary experience of human art making, which is an immediate language. It's a way of organizing meaning and communicating meaning for us. So it goes beyond just the, quote unquote, what is art? It goes into this far deeper realm of what is human relationship with nature. I went to Findhorn in the fall. You do teach at Findhorn. You have to do what's called an experience week, where you experience and immerse yourself in the culture, history, present and future ideas about what Findhorn has to continue to offer the world and how it's changed over time, because once they were a very small community and now they're a vast community, and they've had hundreds of thousands of people over the years come and learn there and take courses with them and participate. So, and then in the end, they all contribute something back. So everything keeps changing and transforming. So
I'm thinking nonverbal language really begets nonverbal understanding, that there's this link between, being in a non-mentally articulated place, or however you want to describe nonverbal, like being more in the realm of abstract thinking, which is more in a meditative state where you're thinking more conceptually or experientially instead of like, gee, did I get that done today? Oh,
Yeah. The linear, yeah.
And it changes our brain waves to be in that present state of experiencing sensorily. And so it also opens us up to understanding nonverbal wisdom or knowledge.
You could say an embodied knowledge, that our body participates in informing us and our heart participates in informing us. And the mind steps back because the mental processes that we've become so inundated with in modern life, we're a hyper literate society, so it's all about reading, which is not an embodied practice. If you read, literature and poetry, then it gets more embodied because it's evoking. It's the art of that. If it's really good literature and poetry, it evokes the embodied, the somatic intelligence to participate in the meaning making that you're coming into. But the heart, your heart is considered a brain unto itself. And it's electromagnetic, it's hormonal, it's biochemical, which is, it's a whole bunch of different things which it communicates to our whole body, mind, sense. And in this understanding, and because I'm a movement-based child developmentalist, and there's an understanding in other people, other studies, other fields that have come to understand the vital foundation of movement to our thinking processes, our intelligences, our emotional organization. Whereas before, it's just, okay, kids, sit still and raise your hand, don't say anything, so that we so confine the child's natural intelligence. I mean, the intelligence has been evolving for hundreds of thousands of years. We confine it, we reduce it, we truncate it so that we're left with a much smaller intelligence that gets very mental. And that's, and so much reading makes that, because reading is not a natural process, it's a cultural one. And it's very clever one. And the original alphabets were somatically based, like the original Hebrew alphabet was somatically based. So it was still a story. Every letter had a story to it. So you're still in the oral tradition of things. And then when the Greeks took the Hebrew alphabet, they totally abstracted. Everything became an abstraction. There was no more any story related to the picture of the letter. They changed the letters all around. So the A was originally upside down and was the first sound of a Hebrew word for ox. So it tells a story. But they turned the A upside down, and they all it had was a phoneme that went with it, with no story left behind. The stories were left behind, and that's where the somatic and the perceptual, the artistic, the aesthetic perception comes in. So original recording of our oral tradition through an alphabet was originally very aesthetic.
Can you talk about primal kinship and what you call a bond with the natural world?
This is what this language is, and it's such an embodied language, and it reflects our embeddedness. So embodiedness and embeddedness, which are two things that are, we're very disembedded. These super rich people making rockets and things, and practicing maybe leaping off to Mars and construct artificial environments there. That's incredibly disembedded. We're out of our rhythms and deep associations with the natural world, and the perceptual processes of the natural world is like, science come along and says, well, what's moving? The stories tell us the sun moves across the sky, but science tells us, oh no, it's the earth that's moving around the sun. That's just an illusion, and it's a very primitive idea. But the fact of the matter is, every single plant life, every single living thing is geared and patterned after the sun moving across the sky. We go through, we're in a stable place, and we go through the experience of that daily, and we go through the experience, going down to the Tropic of Capricorn, coming into the equinoxes, and going to the Tropic of Cancer with the two solstices, and winter and summer solstices. Those are perceptual patterns and rhythms, biological rhythms that inform us of where we are in the world and what season it is and what rhythm it is and what time of day it is and how long it takes to do things and when is the right moment to practice something or bring something back in that you've left behind 6 months ago. These are all realities that if we didn't function by them, we would not survive. So to say that living under those things is somehow an illusion, and this is just one example and a very simplified example, but science has done that. Science has told us, what's really real is these things, that we make tools to look at the microscopic and, highly magnified telescopic level. So these are the real things. But, what we see in deep space, we're not there. What we see on the TV set, we're not there. We see in the magnifying glass, well, there was someone who was there. I can't think of her name right now, but she wrote the book called A Feeling for the Organism, or else another, I'm just not thinking of her name, but she's quite famous. And she was a genetic biologist with plants. And she was so deeply immersed in this microscope, she got connected and associated with these qualities that communicate. Okay, and so that was her phrase, a feeling for the organism. In other words, this is a companion in there. They know you're present, and you know that you're present with them. Okay, this is a whole nother way to be in the world instead of thinking the world is ignorant and inert and just there for us, our human exploitation. Well, we can't have intelligence unless we know where we are in the world, unless we're in relationship to our embeddedness. We need to be embodied in our embeddedness. And that's what I was talking about. This language is about being embodied. So all of our body, heart, and mind inform us. And that we can't have an embodiment without an embeddedness in the place where we are. But in modern world, we're both disembodied and disembedded. And the name of the scientist was Barbara McClintock. And she won a Nobel Prize. She really did usher back into the scientific world that, well, we're in a very intelligent creation. It's not a dead thing for us to exploit and to tease the secrets out of it so we can use them for our own final design. That there's not other than a hugely enchanting and wonderful, wondrous world that we're in that we'll never fathom. And that's mostly part of its wonder.
If what we're observing is always changing based on who's observing, and
yeah,
it means that none of the ways that we try to objectively analyze, like, say, animal behavior, or observe human behavior to understand,
right, yeah.
None of it takes into account that there is a sense of being observed or just this more basic relational consciousness. So can you talk a little bit about improvised ceremonial movement in connection with natural environments?
So what I do is I do guided meditation, go back into utero. So we try to experience this, just the sense of sound and how that resonates in you and what kind of quality and gesture arises from that, so that we get that immediate
reciprocity
of quality, which immediately communicates something to us. Is it a harsh quality? Is it a soft quality? Is it a light quality? Is it heavy quality? Is it fast quality? Is it slow quality? It's all these qualities that give us meaning. So I take us back into that utero, we try to get into that pure experience. And then we come out of utero and we actually emulate the mother-infant dialogue, because it's all this perceptual metaphor, what I'm calling this movement sound. Original language is perceptual metaphor. It's a metaphor. And Gregory Bateson, who was married to Margaret Mead at one point, was also an ecologist and philosopher, tells us that metaphor is not just pretty poetry. It's the pattern in which all of life communicates with one another. And so, I'm bringing us into that. I'm trying to allow my participants to experience that for themselves. And then after we do the mother-infant dialogue, which is all gestural and sound, and it's no words, But there's a communication and there's a bonding and there's a, camaraderie that comes out of that and meaning, deep meaning. Then we go in what I call movement games and movement sound games. So we start playing with these perceptual metaphors and tossing them back and forth across different sensory modes, which is what's going on. With mother-infant dialogue in utero, it's mostly the movement sound. The movement has all these different qualities and the sound has all these different qualities. But when we develop in utero, all of the different senses start coming to sort of differentiate out of that fundamental. And when we're born, we start to exercise the learning and practice of knowing the world through all those different sensory modalities. And so we throw things back and forth from modality to modality, and that's what perceptual metaphor, that's how it operates. You've got to be embodied, embedded to learn it to begin with. And so, we'll like move a sound or we'll move a color. Someone will move and someone will give it a color. So there's a visual movement, sound, transforming back and forth, throwing across the sensory modes. So, you can see the lay of the land of a hill going into a valley, and you can move that yourself with your own body. So you can give it a musical phrase. That's what art is. You see, art is coming right out of all. And so we practice all that and we become very consciously aware of it, because it gets so sublimated in, art and music. We have it once a week in elementary school. These ways of making meaning and communicating have been very marginalized. They're not central. We have this thing called STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And then they say, well, we better add some art to that because that's in vogue and that's part of our research. We do research on the importance of art. And then we put A in there and call it STEAM. Well, my equation is A parentheses STEM. In other words, all of the STEM stuff is actually contained within the arts. That languaging is fundamental. We couldn't have STEM if we didn't have A. We didn't have art. It was aesthetic intelligence. Okay. We bring that into consciousness, which is very contrary to our culture. I evoke the very essence of art making beyond the modern notion, let's have an art class. And so we start with art as a concept and we make it through a concept. But here it's pre-conceptual. It's back into the pure perception of things. We start with movement, just pure sensing movement. Then we have a gestural movement that we keep. And then we allow the feeling quality of that to come into it. And then we allow an image to arise from that feeling quality. And then we make the image on paper. And then we give the image a poem. We give it words. And then we put the poem to movement. So we go full circle. Okay. And that's an exercise. And everyone takes their little scenario like that. And we make mini dances. Okay. So each person becomes an artistic director of their own dance as well as participates in it. And, we're using these conceptually, we make scores about what our poetry and our final piece of movement was all about. And then we come up with these little mini dances. And so that's in preparation for the next step, which is to go into nature, immerse ourselves in a meditative state in nature and immerse in all of the different sensory qualities that nature is offering us in any one given moment and become immersed in that languaging, those qualities of meaning. And we respond in whatever ways that we do, because everyone is going off by themselves to do that. And then we come back together and everyone makes a very simple poem, like we did for that other exercise that we did, a very simple poem that it becomes the score for their little piece. And so we put together a movement ceremonial piece that comes straight out of our immersed experiences and into the art, express arts. We already know that ceremony, indigenous ceremony was all about arts, the arts, and fundamentally movement and sound, but all arts. So here's this language of qualities conveying huge information. So the respect and honoring and reminder of our reciprocal relationship with nature because we are kin. We speak the same language. We've probably heard the notion that once when animals and humans could speak the same language in mythologies all over the world, this idea that animals and us used to talk the same language. Animals and plants used to talk the same. And that's a real thing. That's not just a pretty idea. So
I don't know if we would have even survived evolution-wise if we hadn't been really in tune with understanding.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there's so many anecdotal stories of people communicating with wolves and bears.
Yeah.
But that has to be a skill we all had,
Yes, that's right. And to have, these distinctions between us all, but to know that we have the capacity to communicate with one another. And that's where the kinship lies. I have a friend who wrote a book called Homo Aestheticus, meaning humans as art makers. And that's related to the notion of selection. We evolve certain selected traits for survival. And art's been there, right from the get-go.
We're speaking with Dr. Rebecca Burrill, movement sound instructor. She's got an upcoming retreat at Findhorn in Scotland, June 10th through the 17th. A lot of understanding, a lot of interpretation of meaning comes to us through metaphor or symbolism. In other words, we derive meaning from the insights we get through metaphors in myth, in stories, in art, through dreams, and through meditative states. We have these aha moments in those places of ceremony and ritual and dream time and art making. And there's a relief that comes when there is an understanding that we might not even be able to and often don't perfectly articulate. It's a kind of understanding that is hard to put into words, or that we're not completely able to even understand on like an intellectual level. Like there may be a consciousness, but not an intellectual process that can analyze a clarity or an insight that we get through a metaphor.
That's right. Yeah. Yes. And then, because it is outside the verbal realm, and it is in the embodied whole intelligence, body, mind, heart intelligence that we are communicating with and talking that language. It's really full of wonderment.
Thank you so much, Rebecca Burrill, for joining us today. I really enjoyed a similar workshop you taught, and this forthcoming retreat/workshop at Findhorn in Scotland, June 10th through 17th sounds amazing. And folks can contact you through your website at horsechestnutwinds.com. If you're just joining us, you're listening to Healing Wisdom on WOMR 92.1 FM in Provincetown and WFMR 91.3 FM in Orleans. I'm your host, Pandora Peoples. My next guest is a sommelier and expert wine guide, Mel Eitel. Tell us a little bit about the history of wine.
So wine goes back, it's back in Noah days of the Bible. Like he comes off the ark, and one of the first things he does is he plants a vineyard. Timing wise, by the time he gets the grapes growing and things like that, it's probably like 2 to 3 years. So that part is kind of left out of it. But again, it goes back historically really, really far. Wine has been a part of history since almost the beginning of time, or the beginning of recorded time, at least. And there's so much history that goes along with it that some of my favorite books to read are based on the wine revolution throughout the years, not necessarily like prohibition and people coming out of that, although that's interesting. I really love reading about how in World War I and World War II, France was basically decimated, and the vineyards and the winemakers and all of the cellars that they had for all of their wine was utilized for not great purposes, but to see how they fought back was really, really interesting because they would do things like taint it with just a little bit of kerosene. So for instance, Riesling, which is very much a known grape from Germany, is planted all over the world. And one of its attributes is it can smell like petrol. It can smell like gasoline. And that actually comes from the skin of the grape. It only comes in the skin of the grape when it's a Riesling. None of the other grape varieties have that. So they tainted the wine with just a hint of kerosene or petrol and poisoned people. So like that was kind of how they fought back. Like they didn't have weapons, but they utilized what they could to create this ruckus amongst like the great leaders, because they were drinking all of the best wines. So they did something that would make them not feel so great and possibly like cause them great harm, because they were still fighting for their country and they were still fighting for their land. So it was very interesting to see how people utilize what they have in order to make it, so to speak.
So what's your favorite wine?
Riesling is my favorite white grape. It's very misunderstood. It's one of those grapes or at least one of those wines that most Americans, when I say I love Riesling, they go, "Oh, you like sweet wines." But Riesling outside of the United States is usually very dry and crisp. And doesn't have a lot of sweetness to it. And that's because the American palate is geared more towards a sweeter confection, a sweeter wine, a sweeter, they add sugar to everything, it seems like. If you look on the packages of most of the products that we consume, somewhere there's sugar or corn syrup or agave or some sort of sweetener, because that's how the American palate is. But with Riesling grapes can be made into a very, very, very dry, meaning no sweetness whatsoever, all the way up to what's called a Trockenbeerenauslese, which is berries that are so sweet they dried on the vine, and they have to go out and pick the berries individually, and then they try and make a wine out of whatever is left of that juice, which is very, very concentrated. So it can go from one spectrum all the way to the other. They make bubbly with it. It's called Sect, and it's gorgeous. I absolutely love it. So as far as white wine goes, you can have a Riesling and it can be anything on the white wine spectrum, which is why I absolutely love it.
Thank you, wine guide and expert Mel Eitel, for joining us. I'm sure we'll have you back soon for more of your wine wisdom. You've been listening to Healing Wisdom at Outermost Radio. All of our shows are podcasts at WOMR.org. Also check out healingwisdomradioshow.com and contact me at pandora@WOMR.org. Our theme music is provided by Mason. You can find her website at masonmusic.com. That's MAESYN.